John, over the process of the creation of the Africa Study Bible, more than anything else, has become a dear friend and a precious brother. He stayed at my house and he knows my children, and we know his family a little bit, although his family is quite extensive as he takes care of war orphans and now Ebola orphans in his home village and home area of Sierra Leone, which maybe he'll talk a little bit about. So I haven't met all his children due to that fact, but otherwise in Kenya we know each other for the Kenyan part of John's family. So Dr. John Jusu is the Africa Director for Overseas Council for English and Portuguese, and what he does is that he goes around and coaches and mentors and advises the very top theological institutions and pastor training institutions across the whole continent. So how many schools do you work with?
34.
34, okay, and those would generally be the 34 most respected highest level academic institutions in the English-speaking part of the continent. So his influence on the leaders of the leaders who train the future pastors is really amazing. So we're thankful to have you, John. And I just wanted to start out with a few thoughts about Africa and about what Sandra started with us with the discipleship crisis in Africa, and then we'll let John do most of the talking after that. But you know, after I speak about the Africa Study Bible in a church or a different venue in front of people, the number one question I get, or the number one thing people think about, is translation. Oh, this is a Bible, it's about Africa, and even after they've heard me speak and I've tried to be clear of what I've spoken about, they'll say, you're about translating the Bible into other languages, right? And I said, no, that's a great need, and that's absolutely essential. But there's another Bible crisis in Africa, and that's what we're addressing. And what Africa has experienced is the most amazing church growth probably in history. So they've gone in about 100 years from 10 million or under 10 million believers to 600 million believers. And so if you have that kind of incredible growth over a century, the number one crisis is kind of obvious, and that is discipleship. It's how do you grow these people up in faith that have come to know Christ? And if you look at this sheet that again was on your chair, and it says primary reading languages of Africa, we see that, you know, when the colonial powers left the continent, and John would explain this better than I would, but you know, there's a lot of different tribes, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different languages in every country. So most of the countries, by their own authority, chose a European language as their language of education. So even leaders who preach, for example, in Nigeria and Hausa, they probably got their Bible school, their Bible training in English. So you may go to the market and speak one language. I remember John telling me, he said, well, our church in Kenya used to have a Swahili service and an English service. And then they took a vote, and they found out that people were going to the Swahili service because it was early in the morning, just like we would here in this country. They wanted to go to early service. And so then they turned the Swahili service into an English service. So now they have two English services. Did I get that story right?
That's right.
So we have this tremendous influence, especially among the leadership, of being able to train in discipleship an entire continent of English, French, and Portuguese, which is an amazing opportunity to face this crisis. And I wanted to read Micah 4:2, just with the parallel thinking about the growth in Africa and the growth of the church, and how as you travel through Africa, just as Sandra said, there's such an amazing desire to learn more about the scriptures and more about Christ. People from many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of Jacob's God. There he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the Lord's teaching will go out from Zion, his word will go out for Jerusalem." And I think as a New Testament theologian, there's certainly a fulfillment of that at the end of time. But I also think many of these things have fulfillment in the in-between time as well. And some of that fulfillment is now in Africa. And there's just such an authentic thirst for God's word across the continent, and for even knowing, I'm a Christian, but what does it mean in my life? How does it mean, what does it mean for the way I change my behavior and as I grow as a person? So John and I have worked together for about 7 years now. He is the editor of the Africa Study Bible, and I is the project director. I don't think there's any major decision in the project that didn't have his input or say so, and often his choice. And so it's been a great privilege. We haven't argued over much of anything. We've discussed lots of things, and for a series of years, every Wednesday, some Wednesdays we skip, but probably at least 3 times a month, we would sit by Skype and have editorial meetings and make all those hundreds of little decisions that made the Bible what it is. So I'd like to give over the time to John and just begin to interact with him. But what drew you to the Africa Study Bible as a project and as a vision, John?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. It is my pleasure to be here and to share some of my experiences and my own story as it relates to the Africa Study Bible. And so he's asking, well, what was my affinity towards the Africa Study Bible? Well, it dovetails with my story. She said she did accounting. Well, I am the chemistry at undergrad. And then I was actually to go in and study medicine, but then the war in my country, in Liberia, I was to study. I'm from Sierra Leone in West Africa, and as you know, from the 1990s, we had 10 years of brutal civil war, and that was when I was to go and study medicine. But then it didn't happen. So I found myself in a Bible school to take care of books in the library. And so I started reading books relating to theology. And so I became interested in the way pastors are trained. And so when I did my master's degree in Christian education, I started looking at my students when they go out to preach. What was the content of their preaching? And then I realized that these students don't really have African illustrations that will resonate with the African. Most of the illustrations they give in their sermons are things that are completely strange to us in Africa. For example, this guy preaching somewhere in the jungle, no electricity, and he will give his example about life being a stoplight, a traffic light. When it is red, God is telling you to stop. When it is amber, get ready. When it is green, go. No electricity. Nobody has ever seen even a road, let alone stoplight. And then I go to my own village and sit under the sermon of my pastor, preaching about prayer. He says, it is not like a vending machine. I had never seen a vending machine at that time. The first time I saw a vending machine was 2005 when I came to study at Trinity. So I started wondering, what is it that we can provide for these pastors so that they will give illustrations that will resonate to the African way of knowing things. And so I was in that dissonance, trying to see what to do. And then one of my colleagues actually started speaking about what will it look like if we have a Bible for the African pastor. And being a teacher, I jumped on the opportunity and said, oh yes, let us do a Bible for the African pastor that will relate to the African ways of knowing, the African definitions of reality and how do you relate to that reality, and the African ways of knowing, which oftentimes most of the Bible study materials we have, most of the commentaries we have don't really relate to our context. Not that the Bibles are useless, but they were developed in another context that we don't relate with. And so I became very much interested, and when I was approached by my colleague, I said, I will drop everything I'm doing and give myself to this work, so that we present something to the fairly literate pastor, to the theologically illiterate person. I'm not saying completely illiterate, but theologically illiterate person, whether that person has gone to seminary or in the university, but once they can read and write, they can actually take that text and teach their children and influence their lives. So it was more to give something to the hands of the African pastor that will enhance, to the African Christian, that will not only enhance their life, but they can use it as a discipleship material. So that is one of the major reasons that drew me into this project.
And what is your greatest joy? What's your greatest pleasure in seeing the finished product and holding it in your hands? What do you think about?
Well, you see, she started just narrating. When you put the Bible into the hands of these guys and you just see how their eyes will glow. I mean, and I go through this experience every now and then. I mean, you take it, you put it in the hands of the people, and then they really look at it, they open, they read some few pages, and suddenly you see some of them will literally shed tears. Some of them will say, now I know my culture has value because God is using my own culture to reach my own people. Okay, and there are some pastors, as I was sharing, I mean, they will literally travel 40 miles, some on motorbikes, some on bicycles, to come and have this resource material. And then when we did the book of John, I gave it to my pastor.
We did a little sampler of just John at the very beginning.
And then I sat in the congregation, and here was this guy using illustration fluently, as if he was the one who wrote the article, I mean the feature on the forerunner. Because in his culture, there are forerunners. When important personalities are coming, somebody goes ahead. And then this personality will tell you everything about the person who is coming afterwards. And so he put that into his own culture, and suddenly the story of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ came out clearly. And this is the guy who had minimal theological education. And it was like going down on the floor, putting my hands up and saying, if this is the only thing this guy has gotten from the African Study Bible, then the Lord has done his work. So the response. I gave this text to another guy, and I think I would have told you about this. He said, well, really, is this a reality or I'm dreaming? And he said, if it is a dream, then don't wake me up. Yes, so I mean, the joy that it brings to the hearts of people, to the minds of people, becomes by vicariously my own joy. Okay, in this thing. So, and the reception, every time and every place we've taken this Bible, there's jubilation. People literally drum and dance their hearts out as Africans. God has spoken to us through our own cultures. And then it brings to mind what an anthropologist once said about African cultures, that they are so inadequate that they cannot sustain the gospel message. I said, he didn't say the truth. That is my joy.
how would you say working on the Africa Study Bible changed you?
Well, you know, I did education. I mean, I am an educator, and oftentimes, and a social scientist. And so when we talk of theology, we just think it's for theologians. But God is working with people that are of interest to the social scientist. So I would say, what is God telling me in this situation? So rather than taking the text and making it into a spiritual element, without saying what is actually God talking about, the natural things that he's talking about in the Bible before I spiritualize it. And so when I read the text, I will say, okay, Abraham, for example, was a human being. So let me first look at Abraham as a human being before I start to say he's the friend of God and spiritualize all of those things. And really, when we took that approach of looking at people as human beings, God dealing with them, it gave me a lot of hope as a person working with God. Because if you take Abraham as a person and look at all the blunders he made as an individual, and yet in the end God says, he's my friend. Does that not give you hope? I mean, who would love to be treated like David in the Bible? I mean, I would really pray, God, don't treat me the way you treated David. But in the end, God says, he's the man after my heart. So it gave me a newer perspective about the sovereignty of God in the lives of humanity, diminishing sinful human beings in their human frailty, and yet God came into their lives and transformed them. All right, so I never give up on the individual. When I see the individual and everything that is doing with hope, I believe the sovereignty of God is there to transform that individual. And so that made me look at the people we label differently. That's what we do, social scientists. We label people, prostitutes, street child, this, that, and so we give all of these very bad labels to people as if God has forgotten them. No, he hasn't. He is sovereign. So the sovereignty of God in the life of the person became one of the things, my own transforming experience.
So most of you probably don't know that John's work on his doctorate wasn't in theology, but actually was in education. So your specialty is how do you as a teacher connect with people and help them, how to help them learn effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So is one of the things you've been doing the last couple of years is doing a lot of training of pastors with the Africa Study Bible. Tell us about that. What is kind of the picture of the pastor who does or doesn't have training? What kind of training do they have when they usually come to a seminar? And then what difference do you think, what is that making in their lives, in their preaching and teaching and in their ministry?
Yes, as I said, there's a lot of theological illiteracy in Africa. And the guys come literally, all they could do is to read the text and that is it. And the sort of literary translation they give to the Bible is, I mean, it's bad. Much of the problems we have with our pastors is their failure to understand and be able to read the Bible in context. I'll give you an example. During the post-election violence in Kenya, that is 2007 and 8, pastors were burning churches of other pastors. They were literally killing people, other Christians, because they belong to other tribes. And this is the justification. I asked one, well, you are a pastor, why would you loot the other pastor? They say, oh no, it is written in Exodus that we must loot our enemies and kill them. And these people are our enemies. Say, where is that, oh, when God told the children of Israel to go out of Egypt, that's what he told them to do. And this pastor engaging that pastor after several years on the platform of the Africa Study Bible to say, what is first? Is it your tribe or the tribe of Jesus Christ? So that person does not belong to the natural tribe, but it belongs to the tribe of Jesus. I will use that terminology so that you can understand. It belongs to the tribe of Jesus. And if you belong to the tribe of Jesus, then he's your brother, he's your sister. So when you engage such a pastor for 3 days, and then you let them start to use that Bible as a test for them to see whether they've actually gotten the message, it becomes a transforming experience. So they come to us, they don't have the ability to go to theological schools, and I don't want to blame them for that. It's expensive, it's time consuming. So in what other ways can we reach them so that we're able to transform that level of thinking? So they come to us, all they could do is read the Bible, trust the Holy Spirit, and you're okay. And some of them even say, look, John, I preach and people get saved. I pray and they get healed. I do prophecy, so what else do I need to do? And then I said, that is fine. You preach and people get saved. But how many times do those people get saved? It's almost like every other preaching opportunity, they come up to be saved. Because they don't know what salvation is. And so you start to engage them on the Bible, and then they come to understand this simple, basic theology. One is the white garment church, and he goes around with this scepter and holy water and every other thing else, and I gave him the Africa Study Bible. In fact, he was dressed just like he used to do in the church. And after 6 months, he actually called me and said, is there a possibility for me to go to Bible college? So it is really transforming their views about what it means to be an authentic pastor. That is another joy. When it gives them the desire to study more. But it's not just pastors, even families. Okay, I have seen families going now through the Bible and reading those study notes with their children as a story, and that is the intention. When you take a note, those notes, those lamb notes, those application notes, you tell them as stories, because it is our responsibility. Again, this is one of the things that this Africa Study Bible is doing, is putting the responsibility of discipleship where it belongs, the family. In Genesis 18, God says, I have selected Abraham so that he can teach his children to obey and live in justice and righteousness. The family. And this is what he's doing again. A lot of families are now using this text to teach their children.
I remember sitting in our recap some months later after the Kenyan launch we had a committee in the major countries that did the launch of the Africa Study Bible. And one of the committee members said, this is changing how we do family devotions. Mm-hmm. And then he said, which I think had the most impact on me, he said, you see all these Western examples in media and books and on TV, but this is teaching my children how to be proud they're African. Right. So I just wanted to open it up for questions if people had things they wanted to ask John.
Question. Do you feel like the African Study Bible is augmenting scripture through the stories? Or are people, that's one of the risks, is that they read the stories but they don't go back and read the scripture part. How do you keep that in balance?
When we do the training, we actually encourage them to see that the stories are embedded in a biblical context, and that if you do not understand the biblical context, then the takeaway of the story is lost. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you need to understand the takeaway of this text is actually embedded in the stories. Yeah, so oftentimes the stories are commonplace things that they know. These are not strange stories. These are stories that we know already. But then when you read the text and then you read the story, then you see a connection. Oh, so this is what this text is saying. And at the back of the Bible, you give them a reading plan as well, which will really encourage them to do. So that as they read the reading plan, they don't need to go to difficult commentaries, but they can actually read the story and then understand what the text is saying about. So we really encourage them as to what they do when they are in their private homes. We will depend upon the Holy Spirit to guide them, but we actually do this in the workshops.
Thank you.
Another question. What's the process for using the training material for the Bible? Maybe I can clarify. I'm just curious, like how, do you all have training classes set up, or like how can we assure that people that get the Bibles are properly trained to use them?
Oh, okay. Yeah. What I've been doing in the last 3 years since we launched the Africa Study Bible is to tie the distribution in some places with the training. So, like they would say, we have 500 Bibles. Could you please come and help us in how to use this material? Because most of the commentaries that we have, people are taught in schools how to use them. But these guys are not coming to school. So oftentimes I go in and I'm trying to train a lot more people to do this with me. And they will spend like 2 days just looking at how important are the features, how do you use the features in the African Study Bible, and how can you even use your own resources and the guidelines for you to make sure that you're not going to heresy for you to explain. So there's a whole training manual that we have done, which we use to train the pastors on how to use the African Study Bible. In fact, the title of it is Getting the Best Out of the African Study Bible. That is the name we gave to the training program.
So is that manual available to anyone? Because I'd love to be able to give that along with the Bible.
Yep, it's a free download on
Yes.
our website, but we can, yeah.
Yes, it is there. I mean, we have even the one you can use for a day, for 2 days, and we can actually even have a whole retreat for a week, depending upon the intensity of the study that we want to have and the resources that are available.
The study Bible is based on the King James Version or the New King James Version, or how did you modulate and decide what to use?
Yeah.
It's based on the New Living Translation, which some people from Tyndale House are here from us, but they've been a project partner from the beginning. And early on in the project, we also got input. A lot of denominations even use the King James, and I have seen it used as an official text, and I have seen it in different sermons. Maybe John can verify this, where pastors even will mispreach a passage because they don't understand what it's actually saying in the common English they use now. And so there's even things that are taught that are not scriptural because they're just not understanding the language of the King James. I've sat in churches where that's the case. And so one of our goals for the project really was to have a dual benefit of the Bible. One benefit is the notes. An equal or sometimes even greater benefit is I'm reading the scriptures as the scriptures in a new light because they're speaking a common English. And that was a goal of the project, is to introduce people to a common English Bible, even if they've had a particular slant towards the King James in their own church. And I've talked to numerous leaders who, they tend to be more Pentecostal in Africa, bishops and leaders of denominations that use the King James. And they will say to me, well, I'm still going to preach from the King James, but I'm really glad for my people to read this translation because they understand it. So I'm not going to change my preaching Bible, but I can still endorse this Bible. So I've not had a single leader say to me yet, well, I can't use this Bible because it's a New Living Translation in Africa. Usually, if they want to keep using the King James, they will say, I'm really pleased for my people to understand the Bible, and the New Living Translation is a wonderful translation. And I will endorse it, but I'll keep preaching from the King James. I don't know if you have something to add to
Yeah,
that.
and I have that experience too. I go into Bible schools and I literally see the African Study Bible in tatters, and it's just been around for 3 years. They say, but this is not the text that is required in your syllabus. Oh yeah, they require also to use the RSV or some other things, but really when we want to understand the text, we come back to the NLT, the New Living Translation. And when we put the editorial team together, we looked at, we have also come to the age where we read the Greek and the Hebrew and some parts of the Aramaic, and we really say, if we are there when these things were translated, we would have preferred this version than this. It's based upon our own understanding of the text. So that is how it's being received. But people say it's not academic, but they still come there to get the real meaning and the application, especially when we're now talking of contextualizing the text. They come back to say, well, what does this mean? So I love the NLT because my dad, who is self-trained, he never went to school, but he taught himself how to read English, and that was the Bible he read. And of course, that's what we grew up reading. Yes.
So I would assume like cost and logistics are probably the biggest obstacles in terms of getting the study Bible into the hands of more Africans. Are you looking at strategic partnerships with larger organizations that might have access to more logistics and funds such as Compassion or Samaritan's Purse or other things like this?
We have consistently talked to those kind of mega missions in many countries, and we're making some progress, but mostly you have to go country by country because they've all become very decentralized, so it's a big task. Yeah, so we could maybe talk more about that offline, but it's even with the big organizations, it's very complex. In a good way, because a lot of them have realized they've been too paternalistic, too many solutions from the US that weren't culturally sensitive or weren't culturally appropriate. So a lot of the decision making has gone field by field, country by country, and very decentralized. And that's the thing that's hard for us to work through. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
many-
just
I'm sorry.
if you had anything else to, let's say like the decentralization, the cost, the logistics.
Yeah,
obviously
the
very
logistics,
difficult in each.
we
country
print in
that we have.
India, and then they go direct into African countries from the printer. And actually the shipping process works pretty well, so, the shipping and clearing is not a major problem
Okay.
most of the time. It's easier, there's a lot of India-Africa commerce. There's a lot of businessmen working in Africa who are Indians, and they know how to get things done. You can kind of live off of that pipeline to one degree or another. And so oftentimes it's easier to get a resource from India to, for example, Nigeria than it is to go from Nigeria and to get a resource from India direct to Cameroon than it is to go from Nigeria next to Cameroon, which is right next door. It's actually easier to go India to both of them than to go across that border. It just
Right.
depends country to country, but yeah.
Thank you.
That was my question.
I'm wondering how you handle the copyright problem. Because I know if we want to use something out of the Bible, then we'd have to check on copyright, because some of the things that we've done already have needed that. And that's one of the problems with the King James. I mean, using other versions.
Yep.
King James is not copyrighted, and that's why Pentecostal pastors are very happy to use it. You don't have to pay for or get permission to use it or all that, but I'm not sure how you handle this study Bible with that.
Well, the New Living Translation is a partnership with Tyndale House, so that's how that works. It's been a partnership from the beginning to use that translation. So they're very supportive and encouraging of the Africa Study Bible in the NLT. And then for the notes, we own the notes, and the authors wrote those as we actually researched. We actually paid the authors as they wrote for what they were contributing as creative works. So, which is generally how a study Bible is done. So we would own all that material as well.
So, but you own it, but is it available to be reproduced in other books or other lessons you're teaching, for instance?
Oh, you mean for other people to use?
Yes, right,
what?
yeah.
Oh, okay, right. We wanted to get out there, so that's a major goal, and different people are using it in different ways, and we're very open to discussions to people using it. If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I'm asking a rather difficult problem.
Yeah, but it's well, to be slightly more nuanced, part of our core value is that people like John earn a living and are able to write more, because one of the problems in Africa is that people that could write and are very talented and have much knowledge to share with Africa and the world are not able to, because the systems aren't there for them to earn an income off their writing. And so we're very careful with that stewardship, because we want Africans to earn income off of this so that they can keep writing and keep producing more materials. So it's kind of it's a fine balance, how you balance those things.